Hi there! If you're looking to start learning how to paint with watercolour, you're going to need some new materials. In this video, I'm going to take you through what you need to get started. I've popped a link in the description for where to buy each item I'm showing you in this video, but do shop around online as prices for these types of materials change all the time. The best advice I can give you if you're a total beginner but serious about learning watercolour is to buy good quality materials. Not professional expensive ones, but student, mid-price range materials are the best to start with. It's absolutely fine to go and buy the cheapest materials possible, but often the quality just isn't good enough. Buying from a range that's for students or above will make sure the materials you're using are good quality. So let's start with the most important part, watercolour paint. There's a vast amount of choice when it comes to paint, and the prices vary too. I have here watercolour paint from two of the most common brands in the UK, Winsor & Newton and Rowney. I use both in my paintings. Watercolour paint comes in pans or tubes. Pans are often less expensive and the paint is dried into small blocks. Some palettes have individual pans that can be replaced, but you can always use the tubes of paint to top up a pan when it runs out. You need to activate the paint with water to use it. Using pans means you tend to mix what you need and don't waste paint. Once you've loaded your brush, it's good to use a separate mixing palette so you can control the dilution of your mix and also to mix your colours together. Watercolour paint in tubes works in the same way, only the paint is already a concentrated liquid. It's more instant than using paint from pans, but I find it's easy to waste a lot of paint if you start out this way. Paint in the tubes goes surprisingly far. Okay, so let's talk brushes. As you can see, there's plenty of different sizes and shapes to choose from, but to start off, you'll only really need a couple. Good quality ones will hold their shape well, hold lots of paint and water, and last a good while. These brushes are from Rowney's graduate range and are made from synthetic fibres. It's good to have a large and a small round brush. You'll be able to do fine painting and block in larger areas with this brush, so it's a good all-rounder. It's also handy to have a large flat brush. This is good for getting water and paint down on the page in large areas, and it's brilliant for techniques like a wash or using your wet in wet technique. So now we've got our paint and our brushes sorted, let's look at watercolour paper. As a beginner, you don't want to spend a fortune on expensive top quality paper just to practice with. So buy a mid-range cartridge or multimedia paper. Here I've got a multimedia paper pad from Rowney. It's still good quality, but if you paint with the watercolour straight onto it, it will ripple when it dries. This is fine if you're just testing out your paint or your brushes, but if you're planning your painting, you'll need to stretch the paper first. Take a look at my paper stretching tutorial. It takes you through how to do this step by step. So let's look at some professional watercolour paper and find out why it's different to normal paper. Professional paper will often be made from 100% cotton. This is a sign of its quality. You know it will absorb the water and the paint and dry evenly and last a long time. GSM means grams per square metre. So the higher the GSM, the thicker or heavier the paper is and the better quality it is for watercolour. 300 and above is your best bet. Cold pressed and hot pressed refers to the way the paper has been made. Hot pressed has a much smoother, finer surface, whereas cold pressed is more textured. You can buy thick watercolour paper and use tape or stretch it, or you can buy a watercolour block. With a watercolour block, usually about 12 sheets of good quality watercolour paper have been glued together around the edges. When your painting dries, it's nice and flat, and then you just remove the top layer of paper by releasing it with a scalpel and peeling it off. Then your layer underneath is ready for the next painting. I find the watercolour blocks really take the hassle out of worrying about your paintings drying flat or having to stretch it properly. As a beginner, you should try both ways and settle on what you prefer and what suits your budget. So that's the main part of your setup sorted. Now I'll just go over a few additional things like water jars. You'll need 2 at least, one for cleaning your brushes and one for painting with clean water. I use jam jars mainly because if I use a mug, I end up dipping my paintbrush in my cuppa. Not good. It's good to have a mixing palette with lots of wells and a roll of kitchen towel. And you'll probably need some sketching pencils, a putty rubber or a normal eraser, and some masking tape. It's a lot to take in, I know. But once your setup looks like this, you'll have equipped yourself for the best possible start to learning watercolour. Now the fun can begin. Why don't you check out my Watercolour for Beginners tutorial for a kickstart to learning watercolour. I hope you found this video helpful. Remember, all the information about where to buy the materials is in the description. Thanks for watching, and make sure you subscribe to keep up to date.